Thanks everybody. It's always one of the hardest things is to try and get people back into the session at one of these events because everyone enjoys catching up with their colleagues so much. So thanks for coming back promptly. We're going to move into a session now where we're talking about some of the more practical issues about how do you do this from an organisational board and management level. And we've got a really interesting range of presentations. Just to let you know that all of the PowerPoint presentations will be made available to you, so they'll be emailed out to you and they will also be on the website. So you don't need to be worrying about taking notes particularly about those. So we will move into the first presentation, which is by Marnie Williams, who's the Executive Director of Health and Safety at WorkSafe Victoria. And Marnie's going to talk to us about assessing and managing OH&S risk and creating a safety culture, particularly in relation to occupational violence and aggression. So thank you, Marnie. Thanks for coming along and welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I have had the opportunity to come and speak to many of the boards over the last 2 years, so we continue the conversation. So WorkSafe's vision, mission and values, so we have a very noble vision of returning Victorian workers home safe every day. And we actively work with the community to deliver outstanding workplace safety and return to work, and you've seen today some of the work that we're doing with community to achieve that mission. And we have some very core values that we work to, which is about being constructive, accountable, transparent, effective, and very importantly, caring in the work that we do. So we've heard a lot about the research around occupational violence, but I thought it'd be really important to contextualise for the state the proportion of occupational violence and aggression claims by industry. And what you see in this standardised claims data is that hospitals account for 11% of all occupational violence and aggression claims in Victoria. So we know that hospitals don't represent 11% of the Victorian workforce. So you can see they're highly disproportionate. You also, some of the health sectors or health services have residential care services within your service, and this accounts for 18% of OVA claims as well in the aged care sector. So pretty sobering statistics, I think, if we just look at that for a minute. And when I have been on my little journey around the state speaking to a number of boards, it's really important to contextualise that you're up there in terms of claims with our construction sector and our manufacturing sector. So health is right up there in terms of the people who go to work and don't come home as they did. So within the public health care, nurses are those involved in and those who are involved in patient care have been identified as the most vulnerable. So 71% of claims in the public sector or the public health care system are from nurses, and these include registered nurses, so 46%, registered mental health nurses, 13%, and enrolled nurses at 12%. But it's really important to remember that claims are only one small part of this picture. So most individual incidents of occupational violence and aggression don't result in a claim or even get reported to the employer, which we've heard about today. So often there's no significant injury, and mental injury can result as a result of a cumulative impact of violence and aggression over time. So this is the tip of the iceberg, I think, is what we're trying to say. So we know that occupational violence is one of the top risks for the healthcare sector, based not only on claims data, but also on our research and information obtained through WorkSafe's engagement with the sector. So the top risks include manual handling, which often results in musculoskeletal disorders, slips, trips and falls, which results in not only musculoskeletal disorders but potentially in fractures. There you see occupational violence, either resulting in fractures, MSDs or mental injury, and bullying and harassment. So those of you who were here last year, there was a big focus on bullying and harassment, which quite often results in mental health injuries. So Patrice and Janelle in their presentation covered this these statistics, but I think it's worth re-emphasising that research from our Institute for Safety, Compensation and Recovery Research shows that up to 95% of healthcare workers experience occupational violence, and only 1 in 5 instances of occupational violence are reported. Many workers do not report the incidents as they see it as part of their job, or they don't feel supported by their supervisors. So occupational violence has a range of negative effects on the health and wellbeing of healthcare workers. So it's really important that we support people to report. So what do leaders need to do? Well, underreporting is effectively a false economy. It disempowers your staff and the organisation, and this manifests as staff turnover, in reputational costs, in increased claims, disenfranchised employees, and a whole host of horrible negative things. So creating a no-blame systems-led approach to occupational health and safety is key. The opportunity to investigate and consult with your employees consistently and thoroughly enables continuous improvement and a better return on your investment. Reporting can be encouraged by supporting employees to make reports during their shift. You've got to make it easy. Supervisors and managers acting appropriately on issues when they become aware of them, consistent and effective responses to issues, and what's really, really critical is regularly providing information back to either your health and safety committees or directly through to your employees on the numbers of reports that have been made, how they were resolved, and what actions were taken as a result of the report. So it's not only important that the information goes up, it needs to come back down so that people understand what's happening in the workplace. So when there is better reporting, you can build a more accurate risk profile. Know your risks and actively engage in all levels of your workforce. So today the focus is on OVA as a risk and how you as board members and CEOs can play your role in ensuring it is prevented and managed as far as is reasonably practicable. If you are leading or governing a health service, you need to be asking questions about risk. As Claire said in her opening remarks, OVA is like any other risk and it should be managed accordingly. And we've just had the department go through their framework, so there's a great tool for you to start asking your questions. So to understand your risks and what the profile is, you need to think about the risk in different locations within your organisation. Talked about your admin staff versus your frontline clinical staff, for different tasks within your organisation. So what are the sorts of tasks you're seeing a high increase of reporting on at different times of the day or the week or the year? For different people, for different patients, for different clients that you interact with, or for different staff groups. So you need to understand all those aspects of the risk. Does your organisation have a consistent systems approach in identifying and addressing risks? And is this evident and effective across the organisation? So these are the questions you should be asking. So some examples of controls around systems: the admissions processes that support better identification of risk and subsequent care planning before aggression occurs or escalates. What have you got in place there? The transfer of information about known risks, triggers and controls between staff working on different shifts, in different wards or in different units or at different services or different facilities. We call that your state of knowledge. So what did you know? What ought you have known? And how was that information transferred between shifts? In regards to design, on your wards that regularly have patients with cognitive impairments, such as dementia, ensure that there are some beds in low stimulus locations for these patients and reduce noise from overhead announcements. This is one example of design. On mental health wards, ensure good visibility, especially around your entrances and exits, and provide secure storage for potentially dangerous items, such as kitchen and occupational therapy equipment. Around your training, and we've heard about the training framework the department's developed, it needs to be for all staff, not only your clinical staff. It should be tailored and it should be based on their exposure to risk. So what's important, you need to understand your risk. It needs to focus on things like de-escalation to prevent aggression becoming violence, and ensuring staff are involved in a duress response understand their roles, just for an example. What's really important is information, again, on how to make a report. So it's one thing to support your staff to make a report. I think it's really important that we look the flip side of that. What conversations are having with your managers, your supervisors and your staff if they don't report? You need to hold people to account when they don't report as well. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, not only do you as employers have obligations, your employees also have obligations. So it's really important that, yes, you provide the systems, you provide the support, but if people still don't want to do it, then you change the nature of the conversation. So at WorkSafe, we expect you to be doing the whole lot. So we saw today, this morning, the case study booklet produced for the campaign. That gives you some more examples of the things that health services in Victoria are doing to better prevent and manage their OVA risk in their workplaces. So we'll continue to update that case study document. So the more we see good practice, the more we'll share. So that's going to be an ongoing resource for you. The other thing you need to ask as board members, as part of your role in governing this, is how is the risk being measured and monitored? The development of leading indicators, and I think Will's going to talk a little bit about that, should be a priority. They provide a measure of activities, interventions or initiatives designed to drive improvement and positively impact your performance. Lead indicators are therefore really good predictors of future performance. We are working with a number of health services to review current practices and facilitate shared learnings in the development of lead indicators. So there's 15 health services that are working with us on a Leading in Healthcare project, and we're looking a lot around lead indicators, and we'll actually be convening a forum in September with that group to share some of the learnings we've come out of that process. And you've heard the department is also working with health services to develop lead and lag indicators that can be used to better benchmark and monitor performance. So OHS accountability is everyone's responsibility. Senior leadership can have a powerful influence in developing a positive safety culture where priority is placed on health, safety and wellbeing of employees. We know that good health and safety comes from the top, and the board's role in providing health and safety leadership should be stated formally and publicly in a way that demonstrates the leadership is committed to continuous improvement in health and safety. A sustainable safety culture requires a clear definition of what occupational health and safety looks like, and it empowers everyone within the organisation to be part of the solution. Occupational health and safety is a continuous improvement and dynamic priority, and legislative compliance, we would say, is simply the starting point. So how could you demonstrate commitment to better preventing and managing occupational violence? You can set health and safety objectives and accountabilities. You can ensure effective health and safety systems are in place to identify and control risk. You can allocate resources to prevention and management. You can consult, and I can't say this enough, consulting with your employees is really critical to good outcomes, and you need to monitor and report on performance outcomes. Really critical. So in finishing, treating your occupational violence and aggression risk as a business risk will be good for your business. Integrating risk management into your business and safety integration into your business is really the key. It's not an add-on, it needs to be part of. And we know that health and safety is linked to patient outcomes, so if we keep our staff safe, healthy and well, you'll find that they will provide the best patient care. So thank you, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marnie, very much. Let's open up for questions or comments on that presentation over here. Thank you. We've got some microphones. And we invite them also from the rural and regional people joining by video conference, please feel free to email in any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's Linda Mellows from Mercy Health, and I'm not sure if you're the right person to direct the question to, but I wondered if Victoria Police were involved in the consultation as well, and also the plans for the response. I was just sitting here thinking about some examples that we've had in our own service where we've called the police in and the response has been less than adequate, and we've had to escalate that up through the ranks of the police to say a crime is a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter that it actually occurred in a hospital where there's security. So we've had to push very hard to get people charged for, you know, really serious threats against staff. So I just wondered if they had been engaged.
I will look at the ladies over here.
Janelle, would you like to get a microphone?
We have Commander Shane Cole on our Violence in Healthcare Reference Group, so some of those discussions have been occurring in that forum, and they have also committed to presenting at the staff forum as well. But we understand that there is some work to be done in that area, and that is why we've engaged them in the reference group. So yeah, we are well aware, and it's good to understand your experiences as well. Yeah.
Mm. Have others had that experience of slow response? Lots of nods around the room, so some work to be done there. Other questions? Anything coming in from our teleconference people? No? Over here to David, thank you.
So just following on the same, David Plunkett, Eastern Health, just following on the same topic, where a staff member does want to lay charge against a perpetrator, the feedback from our staff is that it's actually actively discouraged
By VicPol.
by VicPol. So, and I'm not sure whether that's the same experience everywhere, or whether it's nuanced to our region, but that is not only a response, but the follow-up.
There's a lot of nods coming up from this side of the room as well with that, David, so it sounds like it might be a common experience. Moni?
Yeah, look, I in a former life, I used to be the CEO of the Taxi Services Commission, and we know when taxi drivers weren't provided their fare, the police said, oh, it's not a crime, and we had a similar issue. Actually, it's called theft. So I understand the challenge, but we also, Claire and I, sit on a forum with the Minister, with the Chief Commissioner of Police in the Victorian public sector on managing mental injury, and I think we can certainly have a conversation with Graham Ashton to get your message through. So we understand the challenges, and we understand Victoria Police has 4,000 odd workers, and sometimes getting that message down to the ground takes a bit of time, but we'll reinforce that on your behalf, absolutely.
Thanks, Marnie. Any other questions? I just have one about those lead indicators. I know with a lot of the work that I do with boards, it's often about, what information do we need and should we get in order to understand our performance. So would those lead indicators perhaps lead to a suite of standard information that a board might review regularly?
Absolutely. I would say the work presented on the framework with the 8 parts of the strategy, and just looking at training, there's a whole lot of lead indicators there about, how many people participated, what came out of that. So there's a whole lot of lead indicators that could come out of, if you look at the policy framework and you wanted to ask a set of standard questions, that'd be the starting point. It's a great piece of work. Yeah.
Good. Okay, I think we might wrap that session up there. Marnie's slides will be available to you. Can you join with me in thanking Marnie for that very interesting presentation? We are going to move on now to hear a case study from Northern Health, and we have 2 people from Northern Health presenting. Jennifer Williams, who is the board chair, and Will Halpin, who's the Associate Director of Occupational Health and Safety and Wellbeing at Northern Health. And I think Northern's been part of that group of 15 health services, so we're going to hear some of their experiences. So welcome to both Jennifer and Will.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, and I'll kick things off and Jennifer will finish off for us. So our case study today is addressing safety culture at Northern Health, and it's a nice segue from Marnie's earlier presentation, and the links are clear. If we look at the research around those organisations with a robust safety culture performing better and being better placed for our sector, certainly to manage the complexities of occupational violence and aggression. Our story is very much a journey. We're not completely there by any stretch, and I suppose it starts sort of prior to 2015. So what I'll present on today might resonate with a lot of the people in the room, but there is a lot of variability across the sector as well. So we know that there's some organisations that have got a lot of the things in place that I'm going to be talking about, and others that might resonate. Thank you. So as I was saying, the background for the case study I'm talking about now starts earlier than 2015. If we look at the sector at the time, the Victorian Auditor General's report was released in 2013 around OHS risk in the healthcare sector, and the following report for occupational violence and aggression for the sector was released in 2015. If we look at Northern Health at that time, the findings in those reports were consistent with what we saw at Northern Health, in that we saw an increasing OHS risk, but we had relatively low maturity when it came to managing staff health and safety. So we were poorly informed around OHS risk. Those things that we've been speaking about earlier today around lack of reporting was certainly common to us as well. And that meant that we had low engagement amongst the senior leadership group when it came to health and safety and understanding OHS risk. So if you add all those things together, what you end up with is a relatively poor health and safety culture and poor reliability when it came to OHS performance as well. So if you look at the OHS literature, there's lots of theories around safety climate or safety culture. One that I find accessible and simple and applicable for our sector is Patrick Hudson's safety culture ladder, which is on the screen there. So he describes 5 distinct safety cultures, rising from pathological through to a generative health and safety culture. So if you look at a pathological safety culture, as the name would suggest, it's characterised by low-level engagement at a senior level. It's characterised by seeing safety as a problem that's caused by workers, and really the desire is, broadly to try and not get caught. There might be a motivation to improve and an acknowledgement that things aren't great, but there's certainly low clarity around how that might be achieved. If you move on to a reactive safety culture, there's certainly a motivation to improve around health and safety, but it is done in the context of incidents occurring rather than proactively managing those incidents to occur. And then moving up the ladder from calculative through to proactive, you start to see health and safety systems develop. There's the collection of a lot of data, and there's a better appreciation at that senior level for OHS risk and monitoring and reviewing and improving OHS risk. At a proactive level, you move away from being a top-down approach and you've got worker engagement in health and safety, so really well-functioning committees and an understanding and awareness of health and safety right across the board. And that generative health and safety culture, it's really well entrenched, and the focus there is looking for problems and actively solving them. If I look at Northern Health around 2013, 2015, when this story starts, as the yellow box would suggest, I think that we were probably somewhere between a pathological and a reactive safety culture. So there was certainly motivation to improve and certainly an acknowledgement that things weren't great, but really we didn't have that clarity about how we might improve. And Hudson's safety culture ladder helps to illustrate, the roadmap to success or improvement. Whoops. So if we fast forward to 2015, in November we had Marnie and her team come and present to our board, and that was a presentation that was jointly presented by myself. You can see on the slide there, and Marnie's already spoken about the intent of the Hospital Improvement Program. In my mind, this was a real catalyst for us and a bit of a turning point. So the presentation involved the Northern Health context, but also the broader context for the whole sector. And those Auditor General recommendations were provided to us as well as the Northern Health context. So I presented the previous slide around the safety culture and where I thought we might be at, and we talked about some of the things that we might need to do and implement to improve. So the board was really receptive to this presentation, and there were some specific actions that arose out of that presentation as well. So we saw the establishment of an OHS Executive Committee following that presentation, not long after. That continues today, and it meets bi-monthly. So that's chaired by our Executive Director of People and Culture, and we've got the executive team regularly attending that, along with key decision makers. So that committee is tasked with making sure that we've got an OHS and wellbeing strategy developed and that we're actively implementing it as well. In terms of reporting, so we've boosted the metrics that we're recording and the timeframes that we're reporting on those metrics as well, and then establishing KPIs around those metrics so that we're holding ourselves accountable to improvement. Marnie spoke about lead indicators, so we introduced additional lag indicators, so those things that tell us what's already happened in terms of incidents and injuries, but also importantly lead indicators. So what are the things that we're doing proactively to drive health and safety improvement? And that's really helped to start the road to improvement for us around safety culture. One of the lead indicators that we've introduced, and I'll only talk about one, is the occupational performance metric. Oops, sorry, I'll flick through because we'll run short on time otherwise. The occupational performance metric is a tool that's been developed out of Canada, but it has been validated to the Victorian healthcare sector, specifically through the work of ISCA, the ANMF, Monash University and WorkSafe also. This is a simple tool. It's an 8-part questionnaire, and it gauges perceptions of employees, engagement with health and safety, and the way that they perceive the organisation focuses on health and safety. So it's been correlated to higher or lower rather measures of lost time injury frequency rates, and also medical treatment injury frequency rates as well. So what we know is that those organisations that score highly on this have better outcomes when it comes to health and safety, and that it makes for a good measure of safety culture as well. So it provides a score out of 40, and any score above 30 would be seen to be an organisation that's performing relatively well in our setting in terms of safety culture. So that's an annual measure. It's a nice, simple, objective measure that we have that we would set a benchmark to and then look to improve on over time. So that's just one example of a lead indicator and quite specific to safety culture as well. I'll move on to Jennifer now to present on some of our other results.
Thanks for that, Will. Yes, so has all this recording and reported made a difference, and has it? What have we actually achieved? And as you heard from Will at the very beginning, that we see this really as an 18-month journey. There was a lot of work that was done before this, but the sort of comprehensiveness of this program really only dates back to this 18-month journey. And I would like to just acknowledge the support that we've had from WorkSafe and congratulate the work that the department's doing today, which is obviously going to help us all in better getting statistics and data that we can benchmark and compare with each other, as well as do a gap analysis against proper frameworks that are quite robust. Now remember that the literature does tell us that only about 20% of OH&S incidents are reported in the healthcare sector. So this is still very much a barrier to ensure that we are measuring the right things and that we are targeting the right things. Unless we've got the data, we can't do that. So let's just have a look at the safety culture results, the OPM, which Will just described to you. We have established this measure to try and identify how we can improve annually. Now, our score is, hopefully you can read that, our score was 27.39 out of 40. So we are below where we would want to be by quite a long shot, actually. And you will also see up there that the staff rate a little bit lower than line managers and directors, which is not uncommon. People closer to the workplace rate things a little bit lower. So that is not a surprise to us. It has provided us with objective feedback so we can prioritise our activity for improvement of our safety culture. And you've heard today from a number of speakers that culture underpins so much of what we do here. Unless we can really impact culture, we're not going to be able to make the gains that we need to. So the main areas that we've identified improvement is further consultation, communication and input from staff regarding safety and change, and the recognition of individuals and teams that act safely and or engage in safety improvement initiatives. One of the key focus areas we've concentrated on as part of our OH&S and wellbeing strategy is hazardous manual handling, and you saw what a big issue that was from the data that WorkSafe presented earlier. And if you take the risk management approach, we sought to firstly understand and then manage and then monitor this risk. First, we needed to understand the risk, and our incident and premium data tells us that manual handling related incidents are the most significant contribution to lost time, no surprise to anyone here, and the biggest driver of our workers' compensation premium. Our legislative compliance was also poor, and we've done a lot of work there, and with WorkSafe issuing improvement notices in 2015 relating to manual handling risk management. So benchmarking against industry good practice, we identified a need and a way forward for improved manual handling risk management, and we've used a similar process with occupational violence. The last point I'd like to make here is that better understanding the risk enabled us to manage the risk better. We put in place a manual handling risk coordinator in October 2016, and this led to a manual handling framework implementation. Risk assessment and incident investigation has also led to improvements in equipment as well as training. And we now need to continue to manage and monitor this to achieve improvements. So just let's have a look at the data there. The introduction of the targeted manual handling risk resourcing has seen a significant improvement in staff capability through a more robust training program, and you can see the data there. Since October 2016, our program has been enhanced and expanded to all of the labour categories across the organisation, with more than 1,400 staff trained, and that has taken us from 25% of those trained to 80%. So they are now trending down. You can see that on the bottom half of that graph now. Though the real measure of success, of course, will be a reduction in injuries to staff and workers' compensation claims, and we need at least another 12 months of data to be able to get, hopefully, some indication that things are going in the right direction there. So let's look at what we've done in improving our occupation violence and aggression. And again, here we've applied a risk management approach. To better understand the risk for occupational violence and aggression, we reviewed our OVA incident data, and we identified a growing trend of OVA, like probably everyone in the room. Across the whole of the organisation, we did that. We've also benchmarked against the sector, and we've identified opportunities for improvement, particularly regarding our training for staff in high-risk areas and in our processes for managing those patients exhibiting violent behaviours. To better manage risk associated with occupational violence and aggression, we've implemented a risk control strategy taking into consideration a variety of actions and interventions that can broadly be defined under the heading of governance, metrics, process and infrastructure, and also capability. From a governance perspective, we've implemented an OVA committee and executive sponsorship, so the leadership that you've heard a number of speakers refer to. This committee now leads our review of and improvements to our aggression management framework, and it's currently reviewing all of our policies and procedures. Have a look quickly at the premium improvement, which thankfully is going in the right direction. It obviously makes good financial sense to provide a very safe workplace, despite the other multitude of reasons. So those organisations that are perceived by their staff to be safe have better rates of retention and fewer serious injuries, resulting in reduced insurance premiums. So after 2 years of capped increases in our insurance premium, you can see it going up there, a concern to the board obviously, we're starting to see an improvement with our premium forecast indicating a reduction for 17-18 from 16-17, despite an increase of 8% in remuneration in terms of Northern Health's payroll. So we could have expected to have an increase there, so something is going in the right direction. Based on our 17-18 premium simulation, our employer performance rating is expected to greatly improve from 7% poorer than like employees to 10% better performing. That's 17, 18 versus 16, 17. So finally, what are our future priorities for OHS into the future? This will continue to be a significant focus for the management, staff and the board at the organisation. And the executive has identified the key focus areas outlined here, some of which we've already referred to. Our OH&S and Wellbeing Action Plan is reviewed against our risk management framework, so tightly coupled there. Our OH&S metrics and broader external measures, such as the DHHS Statement of Priorities, to ensure that we're responding to emerging trends and new risks. With much hard work, the engagement of the leadership team, the board, the staff and Northern Health, we do believe that we're going to be able to make continued improvements. But as we have said on a number of occasions, we are early on in this process, but it's very rewarding to see some early signs of progress in the right direction. So hopefully that's given you some idea about our journey, and I know that a lot of the management in this area are comparing what they're doing, and I think the toolkit that's been discussed earlier by the department is going to be a big assistance to us all. So thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer and Will. We've got time for questions again, so I'll open up to invite people to ask questions. I saw everybody busily taking notes about the survey, so I think that's generated some interest. Yes, down here, thank you.
Thank you for that good presentation. Thank you very much. So Julie Green from Alden Hospital. When I've been in the private sector and the public sector, just near misses are always an indicator of culture. So I was just wondering how you focus on that measure.
Yes, near misses, reporting of near misses would be an indicator of a good reporting culture, and unfortunately, as the stats have indicated earlier in the earlier presentations, we really only hear about the tip of the iceberg, and generally we only hear about those incidents that have caused harm rather than those that may have caused harm. And part of our strategy is to really increase the reporting culture across not just those incidents that have caused harm, but also those near misses. So we're starting to see that change, and I think the impact of the media campaign, hopefully specific to occupational violence and aggression, means we'll hear even more. Because proactively, obviously, if we're hearing about near misses, that means that we're hopefully preventing those incidents from occurring that do cause harm.
Thanks, Will. Jennifer, any comments on that?
I'll just add that I'm on other boards where near misses are regularly reported. If you've got a really good incident management system, you need to put them there because a lot of the richness of your data and what you can do really does come from those near misses. So I would certainly want to move to that situation where we could report those.
Thank you. Other questions? Anything from our regional colleagues? No, not yet. Are they still with us? Good. I did notice with your manual handling that incident reports that your incidents went down, which is, but I used to always find when I sat on a board that incidents would go down and we'd think, well, that's good, and then they'd go up and we'd think, well, that's better reporting, and it's sometimes quite difficult to interpret what's happening. So did you see any rise in reporting with a focus on the area, or it looks as though it did immediately go reduce?
No, I think, as Jennifer mentioned, the reality with our measure of improvement there won't be the immediate reporting that we're seeing right now. That's all that we can provide at the moment, unfortunately. The reality is that the true measure of success will be a decrease in those incidents that have caused harm. So the lost time injuries, the workers' comp claims, which are looking like they're reducing because we are improving the competency of the workforce, but we won't know that for, that's a lag indicator, and that'll be 12 months from now. So I think, what we can concentrate on right now is more those lead indicators, so the training compliance, and, looking at the skill set of our staff also, and the equipment in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having multiple indicators, Heather, isn't it? Because
Yes.
not one of them can tell the whole story.
Exactly.
And some of these we can't benchmark with, so hearing that the department's going to be able to give us more indicators where we can benchmark on a larger number is fabulous, because that's what we need. We can do it in so many other areas, but in this area we can't.
Yep.
And I've been on other boards, for example, where the board OH&S committee spends all their time looking at about a 120-page report on individual incidents, so there is no rates or proper indicators that you can do comparison on. So I think the data is getting a lot better, but there's still improvements that we can make to get more indicators to tell the whole story.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'll just take one last question from Paul.
Thanks, Heather. Paul Butler, Alfred Health. Well, I was just wondering, how does the survey you referred to relate to the People Matters survey?
Good question. I would love to see the OPM included as part of the People Matters survey. They're separate. So we ran ours in Health and Safety Week, and we had a bit of an incentivisation around it. So there was an iPad winner, which really drove a statistically significant score and a good response rate. Which was wonderful to see. But I think a tool like this could easily be part of the People Matter survey, because it's quite simply 8 questions.
Fantastic. And it's done by a third party in the same way and reported back to the board. Okay. And is the one question around your investment in this? Your premium's going down. How does the investment in resources equate to the potential for a premium reduction for insurance?
Well, to date it's certainly paid off, hasn't it? But, the amount of money that your premium can vary each year is so significant, it's very difficult to budget for those big swings that I know many of you, and I've had experience of that too. So our investment has been very modest compared with what gains we can make financially, even if you just look at a financial metric.
Fantastic. Okay, well, Will and Jennifer, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Congratulations on the work you've done. Please thank them. And I'm sure that Northern Health is willing to share the work that they've done and the progress they've made if anyone wants to follow up on that. So thanks to you both. We're now going to move on to a presentation about legal issues around occupational health and safety with a focus on workplace violence and aggression. This is going to be presented by my colleague from Clayton Utes. Get the title of Alistair's presentation right. So I'd like to introduce you to Alistair Smith. He's a Senior Associate in our National Occupational Health and Safety Practice, and his title is First Do No Harm, Legal Risks of Occupational Violence in Healthcare Settings. Alistair's going to run this pretty interactively, so I'm going to sit back and relax for a little while, and he's going to be happy to take questions from you as he goes. So over to you, Alistair.
Thanks a lot for that, Heather. Like most lawyers, I absolutely adore the sound of my own voice. But the reason that I'm here today, obviously, is for everyone in this room's benefit. So the way I'd like to run this session is I'll start talking. I'll start talking about sort of what I want to talk about and some of the things that I think might be important. But please pull me up as I go through and ask me any questions that you might have. Challenge me on anything that you don't agree with so that we can talk about it. Or if there's something you'd like to discuss that's within the broad realms of the topic. I don't do fencing disputes. Please just let me know and we can have a discussion about those things as well. Before I though get into the sort of substance of the presentation for today, I guess I wanted to talk to you about a couple of thoughts that I had. I should say, sorry, to those of you on camera, I'm going to be bitterly disappointed if I don't get a written question. So if someone could please send something in, that'd be great. When I was having a think about what I was going to come and say, there's all the technical legal issues, there's the obligations, there's all of that good stuff that we lawyers like to talk about. But what's really important with respect to occupational health and safety law? So I just wanted to start at that point, a bit of a first principles and more of a philosophical look at things. So why do we have laws? We have laws to basically codify what governments tell us our moral obligations are. It's pretty common ground across both sides of politics, and I think most of society, that everyone should be able to go to work and come home safely. The Occupational Health and Safety Act here in Victoria, like its counterparts right across the country, is directed at telling employers, telling officers of boards, that we want you to make sure that your people come home from work safely. Similarly, the obligations that were mentioned earlier that are imposed upon individuals are telling people we want you to take care not only of yourself, but the health and safety of those people that you work with, and we want you to make sure that those people that you work with, along with yourselves, come home safely and in the same condition that you started in. And at the end of the day, if we're putting the amount of effort that we need to be putting into making sure that our people are coming home safe, we're educating them, we're training them, we have systems in place, and if our people are putting that effort in as well, then we're all going to comply with our obligations. I haven't sort of come here to do the fire and brimstone legal presentation that some of you might have seen before. I think the time for that has passed, and the fact that you're all here shows that you actually have a commitment. I'm more here to explain, I guess, what some of the obligations and some of the risks are. The other thing that occurred to me when I was preparing this presentation was that health is a bit different to many of the other industries that I deal with. I do a lot of work in construction, I do a lot of work in mining, I do a lot of work in petroleum and gas. Those sectors are focused on particular economic gain, and the majority of the risks, while there's obviously human factors involved, relate to things, explosive atmospheres, gas, asphyxiation, and all those sorts of nasties that can catch up with us. Here, when we're talking about occupational violence, we're actually talking about humans who are significantly unpredictable, and we're talking about humans that we're actually trying to care for. It's very easy to say, that's unsafe, you can't dig up that coal. You can't dig up that coal until you put extra controls in. But when we've got someone with dementia who doesn't know what they're doing, when we've got someone with severe mental illness who's perhaps delusional, when we've got someone under the influence of ice or something like that, and they have a serious medical issue, we feel compelled to help them. So there's a much more significant challenge in trying to help those people while at the same time trying to keep our people safe. There might be circumstances where you need to go, we actually can't help that person because it's unsafe to do so. But by and large, what we're going to be looking at is, okay, how do we keep our people safe while meeting our other moral obligation, which is to actually care for people's health. And that's a much, much bigger challenge. I've advised in the past, in addition to health services, prisons in respect of prison guards, who are expected, often in small numbers, to stop significant violence by some incredibly dangerous people. And I've advised defence, who obviously have a public good as well, which sits against some of the dangerous training that they do. So I guess I wanted to make those observations because as we go through and we're talking about some of these health and safety obligations, I'm going to touch back on some of these issues and some of the strategies that we might use to comply with our legal obligations while still caring for people as we properly should. Okay. I'm fantastic with technology. Which one is it?
There we go.
There we go. So, what is occupational violence? I'm not going to labour on the point, but it's actually always useful to have some sort of statement about what it is that we're talking about. Now, we've gone through this quite a bit this morning. The one thing I just wanted to take from this, and I use the Department of Health and Human Services definition. Someone will correct me if I've got an old version from the internet. But it's just this talk about abuse and threaten. Leaving aside actual physical violence or things that would otherwise constitute an assault, we're talking about some of the mental aspects earlier today. It's important that we pay attention to those because, of course, the occupational health and safety legislation isn't just directed at physical health, it's also directed at mental health. So we actually need to have systems in place to ensure not only that people aren't physically harmed, but that people's well-being isn't affected by these sorts of things as well. The other thing that's worth mentioning in this context is we've had a significant focus today on patient on staff violence, which is obviously a significant issue. There is potentially also patient on patient violence occurring in our workplaces, and indeed there is staff on patient violence that occurs from time to time as well. We've seen some well publicised cases of that over the years. So in this drive to protect our people, which is an incredibly important thing for us to do, we should not forget that we need to manage these other risks that are equally as important. And indeed, we have obligations in respect of those risks. What I'm going to talk about, I'll just skip over this slide. I think we've talked enough about the problem, and I'll make some observations about some of the data requirements and those sorts of things shortly, is to talk about the legal obligations. Now, of course, as is my usual practice, I didn't do notes and I can't read exactly what they say, so I'll just give you the general gist. So I've picked out three. There's a fourth one that I'll mention that was mentioned earlier today, which is also important. But in Victoria, the language focuses on that of an employer, and it requires the employer to do that which is reasonably practicable to protect the health and safety of employees and to protect the health and safety of persons other than employees of the employer at the workplace, which, might I add, would include contractors such as security guards. So we have these obligations to do what's reasonably practicable. Then I would say almost everyone in this room, if not everyone in this room, has a further obligation as an officer of whichever the relevant body corporate is, and whether that's an unincorporated or incorporated body, including government bodies, to take reasonable care to ensure that those bodies don't commit an offence as well. So those are the obligations. I'm not going to dwell on the legal technicalities of it all. What I'm going to talk about is maybe some practical compliance, because if we talked about legal technicalities, you'd all be asleep and it'd be midnight by the time we were done. One thing I will say is just remember that term reasonable. It does mean what is reasonable in all of the circumstances. So we do need to take into account, and I'll talk about a prosecution that happened in New South Wales, which will give you a bit of a flavour of the sort of things that might be prosecuted. And there's others here that could comment more on that sort of thing than me, but it does serve as a useful example. So how do we discharge these obligations? The thing about this law is it's great at directing us about what performance we need to achieve. It doesn't say much tell us how to do it. What it says is you need to manage your risk, you need to understand what your risks are and manage them. It doesn't say thou shalt this and thou shalt that, which is a fantastic thing because it actually gives you the freedom to determine what's the best approach in all of your circumstances. Now, I've drawn up this little diagram, which again I can't read from this distance, but luckily enough, I'm pretty sure I remember what's in there. So the circles around the outside are talking about, I guess, systems and processes, and the circle in the middle is talking about cultural change. Because ultimately, for you to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve, you need a combination of both. Culture obviously is important, as we've talked about, with respect to things like reporting. But it's also important that people buy into what the systems are. They understand what the systems are through training. They actually see the results of the system. There were some comments earlier today about the fact that one of the reasons for underreporting, I think it was in the first presentation, was that people report and then they don't see anything happen and they don't understand what's happening. Why are you going to report something if you don't know what's happening? You're banging your head up against a brick wall. It doesn't work. So you need to have a culture, but to have a culture you need systems. So there's a question as to which drives which, whether systems drives culture or culture drives systems. I'm not going to attempt to resolve that. Rather, I'm going to suggest that you probably try and implement both at once, and you change both at once and they grow together. So you need to understand the problem. We've heard again and again today in respect of data that we don't have sufficient data and that these incidents are significantly underreported. That's a cultural issue. It may also be an issue with difficulty of reporting. Certainly that's what the Auditors General's report that I read said. There's probably an issue with follow-up. So let's make reporting easy for people, and when we get the report, we do something about it. So that's where appropriate investigating incidents, particularly those more serious incidents, but also actually using that data to inform the way that we work in the future. Because going back to the law for a second, if there's something we knew about and we had the data and it told us that we had a particular problem and we've chosen not to address it, we're going to have a very hard time standing up in front of a magistrate and explaining why it is that we failed to address it. And of course, there's a moral imperative there as well. So then we've got that data. What do we do with it? We know there are issues. What do we do? Hazard identification, risk assessment, and the implementation of controls. And that's something that each and every one of us does every day. Some of my colleagues that work in safety, talking my non-legal colleagues, like to mystify risk assessment and talk about all the structures and things that you need. We do risk assessments every day. If I was to walk over and sit on one of those chairs, I might walk over and I might have a look at it and make sure that it's not about to fall off the back of the stage, that it looks sturdy, that it's suitable. That's a risk assessment I've done in my own head. Yes, it's not formalised. Yes, it's not written down, and for our higher order risks, we absolutely need to do that. But it is not a special skill. It is something that each and every one of us can do, and it's a process that each and every one of us can learn. My point with that is then, so we've got those natural skills. The statute actually tells us what we need to take into account. Statute tells us that we need to eliminate risks, and if we can't eliminate hazards, and if we can't eliminate the hazards, we need to reduce them. Now here, when we talk about occupational violence, those hazards are people. So unless we get the Terminator along, we're not going to eliminate them. So instead, we need to actually do something to reduce those risks. I'm not going to go through the hierarchy of control and all that sort of thing for today's purposes. It's not necessary. But what I will say is that the higher order control, the more separation and the better controls that you can get, the better off you are in being able to show that you've complied with your obligation. So we've got that. We've got implementation. So we need to actually implement these things. There's no good creating a system and having the system sit on the shelf. In fact, in many respects, again, having a system that you don't use is actually probably worse than having no system at all. Because if you have a system you don't use, what you're saying is, I understand my obligations, I understand the risks, I know what the problems are, and I've got a system for it, but I couldn't be bothered implementing it. Now, if you think about that for a second, that's a terrible, terrible message to be giving anyone, because you know what the problems are, but you're not doing anything about it. So I'm almost out of time. I got nowhere near through what I'd planned to get through, which is unsurprising. I think I'll just finish on a quick note about a case from New South Wales, the name of which has just escaped me. But effectively what happened in this New South Wales case gives it an illustration of the things that shouldn't happen and how prosecutions can occur. In that matter, there was a person who was working in a residential care facility. This facility was a respite facility by and large, but they had a couple of they had at least one permanent resident. This particular permanent resident was a male. He was about 20 years old. He had some cognitive disabilities. He also had schizophrenia. He'd been diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and he'd had some delusional episodes in the past. Over Christmas, he was left alone. He also had a record of some sexual assaults against other patients within the facility and potentially against carers. And he was left alone with a female carer. They were the only two people in the facility over Christmas. The facility didn't have any policies or procedures for dealing with mentally ill patients, and it didn't have any policies or procedures for dealing with occupational violence. It didn't have panic alarms. It had 2 landline telephones, and this is an old case, it was before everyone had a mobile phone. Had 2 landline telephones. The patient in question was showing some delusional behaviour in the afternoon. That behaviour worsened over the course of the day. The carer took him for a time to another care facility to have an afternoon tea and used some intervention strategies to try and control his behaviours better. Following that, they went back to the home. So no one at the other home said, "Oh, hang on, maybe you should stay here," where we've got some more staff and some more people, because this behaviour has been continuing to be exhibited. So they go back to the home. The carer becomes deeply concerned about her position and locks herself in the bathroom while she has a bit of a think about what she can do. Fortunately for her, while she's in the bathroom, she opens the bathroom window so she has an escape route if she needs it. She then decides that she will telephone someone, so she has to go back to one of the landline telephones. She opens the door and this chap's there, and he starts strangling her. And he continues to strangle her. Fortunately, he decides that he needs a knife. He lets her go. He says something to the effect of, "I need a knife," and starts to wander off to the kitchen to get a knife. This is not going to end well, save and except for the fact that, thinking quickly, the care worker escapes out the bathroom window, only barely. She lost a shoe in the attempt because this chap saw her trying to escape and went back after her. In that case, in New South Wales, her employer was convicted and fined in the order of $90,000. The point I raise from that is simply this: you look at the multiple failures in there about the control. So it's not that this guy shouldn't have been cared for or looked after, but looking after a patient who displays that level of risk ought only be done when there are sufficient controls in place to protect the person doing the looking after. And with that, I'm out of time, I think.
Thank you, Alistair. Did we get any questions from our rural colleagues? No. Any questions here from the floor? Yes, thank you. Do we have a microphone? Thanks.
Dale Fraser from Ballarat Health. Just a question on our legal rights to exclude people from our facilities, whether they be under active treatment or visitors to our facilities. Can you perhaps just comment on what our rights are and how we might go about making that far easier to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer, like all good lawyers, is I don't know immediately. I'd have to look at a book. Just to add to that, though, I was actually giving this some thought this morning. So it will depend upon the way in which they're excluded. So in the first instance, when you have security guards, for example, excluding someone, whether they're using reasonable force, if they need force to exclude them, there will be issues, I would imagine, about getting orders from the court, if necessary, to keep someone away from a property. So that that may or may not be possible. I'm not entirely sure. Then there's the issue about who makes the decision. There's other liability issues that come with that. I mean, it's a multifaceted sort of issue in the sense that there will be certain service obligations, I imagine, that the hospital has, and there will be certain ways of, under the legislation, under the health legislation, things that people have to do. So account will need to be taken of all of those things in making a decision about excluding someone. So that's work, though, that should all be done before we're making decisions to exclude someone. So what you would ideally do is you'd have someone look at all of that, and you develop a policy or a procedure which says, if we're going to exclude someone, here's the things that need to be present so that we can make that decision. And you've got then the decision-making guide to make it easy. So short answer is I can't tell you all the answers. Long answer is someone needs to consider all of that and basically develop a guidance or a checklist and some training for it.
Thank you, Alistair. John.
Yeah, John Raza from Latrobe Regional Hospital. I'm just wondering, in relation to security officers, which you just raised, in terms of hospitals, I guess they used to employ security officers. Now many of them are contracted, but there's still quite a few hospitals that employ their own staff. What are reasonable expectations of security officers putting themselves in harm's way in order to, particularly in EDs, because a lot of times they were hired just to make sure that doors were secured after hours, the parking was controlled, all those sort of things. But now the level of aggression, I suppose, has gone up. So what can we expect of A, employees who are security officers, and B, of contractors who may be hired to achieve a certain outcome?
It's a fascinating question. I think what it comes down to, and I don't think there's really a distinction to be drawn necessarily between employees and contractors. I think the more important question is, are we hiring the right people with the right skill sets to be security officers, depending on the nature of the role? So if you have someone who's hired in more of that traditional custodian role, to go around and check that doors are secured and those sorts of things, you'd have certain expectations for someone doing that role, which would be, it's a fairly basic skill set. If you're hiring someone to be in an emergency room in an area where you have significant problems, you'd want someone that was more skilled and more capable. Now, the state, I don't think, has the expertise necessarily to be A, training and B, hiring those people. So you'd be looking at expert security providers to provide those individuals. But then I think there's a level of training over and above that, because they're not nightclub bouncers, of getting the right individuals who are trained properly, but who also appreciate the environment. So I would have thought the obligation is probably a risk-based obligation to look at what the risks are and what skill sets you need from your security guards to adequately handle the risks in a particular environment.
It's difficult, isn't it, to know what the standard is, I guess. And the standard is as far as is reasonably practicable, and that's always, in a sense, it's looked at in retrospect. That's when you're tested on it, isn't it? But I think the point of, there's a lot more information sharing that is going to be available between health services as to what a reasonably practical approach might look like. Yeah. So hopefully people can share that. One last question, thank you.
Loretta Shields from the IND Hospital. The definition that you put up, the department definition, was fairly broad. Would that include staff to staff?
Look, I would have thought so, and if it doesn't, it probably should. So, and one of the points I made earlier, and I think it's a really, really important one, is that yes, we're focused on patient-to-staff occupational violence today, and that's an incredibly important issue, but there is no excuse, particularly for staff-to-staff violence, or staff-to-patient violence either. Ultimately, everyone, the obligations are in relation to everyone at the workplace, therefore it doesn't matter. And there are, I think there's a bullying code of practice here. It's not a code of practice, it's guidance. So there's bullying guidance that WorkSafe publishes, and of course there's those mental aspects to the duty that we're talking about, plus the physical aspects. It's never okay. It doesn't matter if it's staff to staff, patient to staff, staff to patient.
I guess just... Oh.
The question is, what about family to staff, relatives to staff? It's everyone in the workplace, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. When I say patient to staff, I should actually be broader than that. I should say public to staff, because that's the reality. As specifically, when people are upset where they don't think their family's getting appropriate care or those sorts of things, absolutely falls into the same category. And of course, many of these things, not everything that we describe in that definition, but many of these things are crimes. It's quite appalling from my perspective what I heard recently or throughout this session, that the police force don't actually take it seriously. But these are crimes. Assault is a crime. It's just unacceptable under the law in any way, shape or form.
One last question. I think, Loretta, you wanted to come back?
It's just more about the reporting that we need to...
Just pop the mic up. Thanks.
I guess my point was just about reporting too into the future. If we're looking at benchmarking, that we get the definitions right, because we are all reporting on bullying and so forth. So,
yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and so that would be a request for standardised definitions and perhaps templates. And I often think on boards and at senior management, we all have a very clear sort of set of reporting around financial performance of a health service. We all do the same. We all know what's to be done around some of these areas. Getting more commonality would be good, wouldn't it? And is being worked on, obviously. Alistair?
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Agree. Okay. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Alistair will be here for the day, so you can approach him over lunch to have some more discussion about that. We have one more presentation prior to lunch. It's from Tony Walker, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Ambulance Victoria, well known, I'm sure, to everybody in this room. Really highlights in the video we saw earlier with the advertisements the risk that your staff are under because they're in quite uncontrolled environments. So Tony's going to talk about what's happening in AV around occupational violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and particularly any elders that might be with us here today. I'm going today to talk about... Am I pointing in the right direction?
Yeah,
gotcha. I'm going to talk a little bit about Darrell. Darrell's a 43-year-old female paramedic with Ambulance Victoria. She's works in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. She's been a paramedic for 13 years, loves her job, really loves her job, and has a young family. Traditionally represents a large proportion of the workforce that we have working for us every day. So Darrell's story is a really interesting story. So Darrell has a... I'm going to have to use... sorry, I'm going to grab my notes because I cannot see that and it's going to cause me no end of problems. Can someone pass me... I was going to try and bluff it, but I'm not going to even try it. Thank you. I heard one of the speakers earlier say, we can't see that thing, and I'm thinking, I'll be fine, I've got glasses, that'll be okay, and that'll teach me. So Darrell, she's every day provides life-saving interventions to her patients. She was assaulted by a drug and alcohol agitated patient, knocked unconscious, had her jaw dislocated in the incident, and tells a story of having to go home to her family from her workplace that night and explain why mum's been beaten up when she's gone to work that morning.
I was attacked by an intoxicated drug and alcohol affected patient. I put her in the back of the ambulance for safety. She started to punch me. I ended up on the floor of the ambulance. She dislocated my jaw, gave me a concussion and bit me my whole way down the body as she was being dragged off me by police.
So Darrell's had her fair share of scratches and bruises in her career. She's been verbally threatened, abused and knocked unconscious. She worries daily about transmittable diseases from spitting of patients. Her attack was hard to explain to a young family. And if you speak to her and many of her colleagues, they tell you it's changed their trust. Every time these things happen, a little bit of something changes in them about the way they deal with it. Darrell and her colleagues have an expectation that occupational violence is just part of the job that they do. Oh, sorry. So Darrell's one of 4,200 paramedics in Ambulance Victoria, and shockingly one of 72% of our workforce that have reported having experienced occupational violence as part of their job. So if we look at our story 2 years ago, it was a really interesting place. We had 40% of our workforce, our paramedics, who had an emotional response to occupational violence. 26% of them felt compelled to approach an incident, a violent incident, rather than retreat to safety. They felt that was just what was expected of them. They felt pressured to approach violent cases and did not feel that they had adequate skills to manage aggressive patients. What was most confronting about that, though, and this is something that's come through from other speakers today, that 39% of our workforce simply accepted occupational violence was part of their job. So if you listen to the community was outraged by this. The community basically was saying that our paramedics are out there dealing with people at their most vulnerable, that they expect that people, in their need of hour of need, would not be assaulted, and that our patients were placed at greater risk because of that. So their ability to be treated was placed at greater risk. So I came into the role of acting CEO about 2 years ago, and one of the things that really became clear to me early on as we started talking about this issue of occupational violence is, as a CEO of Ambulance Victoria, my people are my responsibility. I'm legally obliged to provide a safe workplace to our employees. I'm held accountable for that. And if we were going to continue this issue of dealing with occupational violence, we had to change the way we were going to be talking about occupational violence and what we did about it as an organisation. So fundamentally, we had to stop what we were doing because we were getting very, very good at defending what we had, and actually had to say it's not working and we have to do something different. But that was not going to be easy. So what we were proposing was going to be a challenge to all of us across the organisation, that it would challenge our people, particularly our paramedics and their focus on patient first, and it would challenge the culture of our organisation to its very core in the way in which the values of our workforce come in the way in which they do their job. And in simple terms, the cultural change started with simply 3 words from me, and that was, you don't go in. Up until that point, no one in our organisation had actually, at my level or at senior executive level, has said, you do not put yourself at risk. And, you know, there's a whole lot of reasons people go, I don't want to say that because there's all the legal issues of patients and other things. If you take your staff's view of it, we simply said, you don't go in, you don't put yourself at risk. That stopped, the culture stopped in its tracks. People were going, well, we've never heard that before. And all of a sudden it became, right through the organisation, you don't put yourself at risk. And it required a number of reforms to deal with that. One was around policy, which I'll talk about, improved accountability for our organisation, improved visibility, and looking at innovative training to enable us to actually make that reality. So we first up developed and revised our occupational violence policy, which was then promulgated, developed with our Health and Safety Committee, promulgated across the organisation. We improved triage at the point of call, so we started better triaging and working with Victoria Police to understand the types of cases that might be particularly risky. I'll give you an example. When one of my paramedic crews rocks up to a place in country Victoria, wanders out of the vehicle for a medium acuity case, picks out their bags, wanders towards the front door of a house, and 3 special operations group trucks pull up beside them, someone's got more information about that house than I do. And realistically, it became clear that we needed to work better with Victoria Police to try and understand what sort of incidents we were attending and what that actually meant. We also identified the fact that we were trying to manhandle people who are violent into situations, or police were arresting them and taking them to transport them to hospital. And we had a chemical restraint policy using midazolam, which was relatively effective, but not dealing, when we looked at the data, wasn't dealing with really allowing us to safely manage potentially violent drug-affected people. So as a result of that, working with our medical advisory committee, implemented ketamine as a sedation drug to enable us to chemically restrain violent people or drug-affected people, to enable them to be protected and restrained, to enable the paramedics to be safe and the people around them to be safe. As well as that, we very much focused on empowering our staff to be, as I said earlier, feel safe and supported, that they don't have to enter a situation where they don't feel safe and to withdraw from one where they don't feel safe. And I made it quite clear, I'm vocal in the media and to our workforce about this, that's my responsibility to deal with the patient outcomes of that, it's not theirs. I'm accountable for providing them a safe workplace. They can feel they'll be supported by me. If there are any issues from them not attending a patient, that is my issue to deal with as the CEO. Visibility is critical. So I see every single event of assault reported. I have a report alert on my phone, come through, that alerts me every time a paramedic reports assault. And from a board leadership point of view, we have one of our board members here today, I'm required to report to my CEO within 24 hours every single instance where a paramedic is actually physically assaulted. So for me to do that, and those of you that know Ken Lay as my board chair, that's just not a one-liner. It is very clearly explaining what's occurred. And when we have a board meeting, the first item after traditional acknowledgement of the traditional owners is around the health and safety of our staff. So it sets the tone from the beginning all the way through that this is critical for us as an organisation. We have much better reporting going to the board, to executive board, myself, as I said, and we also see a detailed quarterly occupational violence report going to the People and Culture Committee around what's occurring with occupational violence. And trust me, it is drilled into by our board deeply. In the essence, every single person in our organisation is accountable for safety and particularly issues of occupational violence. So we've had a widespread communication across the organisation through multiple channels. So really making it clear paramedic safety comes first. Previously, it was patient first, paramedic safety second, even if we were never explicit about that. We are now explicit, it is paramedic safety first, and everything else comes secondary to that. We encourage reporting. We've made it quite clear we need to know reporting. The things they've normalised, we need to hear about them so we can look at the thematic issues and actually address those as we've been doing. And they know they're backed by us and by me if they don't feel safe going into any situation. We've also focused very heavily on training. And I'll just play this particular clip now for you to give you a sense of some of the innovative approach we've taken for training in our organisation.
A new virtual reality program is teaching paramedics how to better protect themselves from violence while on duty. Victoria is the first state to roll out the training, which is delivered by experts in hostage and crisis situations. Emma O'Sullivan has more.
From the safety of a classroom, these paramedics are immersed in situations where the danger feels real.
Don't you start blaming me. I had nothing to do with it.
The program is an Australian first for emergency crews. All Victorian paramedics will complete the training this year.
We don't want our paramedics treated as punching bags. We want to give them the skills and we want to give them the permission to keep safe.
The high-tech headsets show two scenarios where crews are surrounded by potential threats.
Can you open your eyes for me?
I must admit I felt like I was actually at a scene. You turn your head around and you actually can see all the things around you. Look behind you, you can see people behind you.
The trainers here are experts in crisis and hostage situations. They're coaching these paramedics to look for threats like knives or people or shadows in other rooms.
In Victoria alone last year, paramedics attended more than 5,000 cases where they were exposed to violence or aggression, an average of 13 cases a day.
I joined Ambulance Victoria back 30 years ago. Occupational violence was a very rare thing. Sadly today, it is a daily occurrence for our paramedics.
From April, Ambulance Victoria will begin trialling mobile cameras, which paramedics will wear in a bid to deter would-be aggressors. Emma O'Sullivan, 10 Eyewitness News.
So this training fundamentally is about situational awareness. So we can say don't go into somewhere safe, but how do you know what safety is? And so this, for a particularly young workforce I have today, is very much about immersing them in a scene. You look around you, you can reflect on the knives that were in places, where your exit points were. It is not a chalk and talk. It is actually immersing you into the environments in which you're working every day, and you're not learning because you've been exposed to it. You're learning in a safe place. You would have seen the video as well. We're rolling out body cameras for our paramedics. All paramedics have duress alarms as part of their normal kit, which will also enable us to really get a sense of recording when they're in danger. Now, will this make a difference? We're not sure. This is a trial. We want to see what it does do. It will certainly provide, and taking the comments earlier, it will certainly assist with prosecutions. So one of the things we do face is the paramedics are often reluctant to lay charges. We're working as hard as we can with them in Victoria Police to assist them right the way through in laying charges against anyone that physically abuses them. So what does this all mean for our organisation? So from our perspective, you'll see there we've got increased safety. So basically, as a result of the changes we made, patient care is no longer at the detriment of our staff safety. That's first. Since we've rolled out this training, this occupational violence training, we've seen a 50% reduction in the number of assaults reported. So this is not about violent incidents. That's still going up. But they're reporting less assaults because they're not going into dangerous situations necessarily. They're better managing those situations because of the training. And as a result of that, we're not, retrospectively trying to understand what occurred, they're able to have better situational awareness. So we're seeing, as you see there, reported assaults over the year have reduced by more than 50%. But as I said, it's not stopped. So you see there the number of reported incidents is of exposure to occupational violence is still on the up and up. It's sort of a seasonal trend there, but it's been up and up. And can I tell you, after the campaign was launched this week, my email's gone nuts. So again, that sense of the staff, it's reiterated to people the importance of reporting. So I'm getting, I'm seeing a much greater number of reports coming through, not of people assaulted, but of exposure to occupational violence, the things that would have normalised before. So what does this mean for me as the CEO of Ambulance Victoria? Well, in essence, for me, I'm leading an organisation that values its people and puts people first and foremost, and that they come to work knowing that they are supported to put their safety first. I say this and I mean it personally. For me, I want people to be able to go home at night to spend time with their families. I have a son who's a paramedic. I have a sister who's a paramedic. I have friends who are paramedics. They deserve the right, similar to every single one of us in this room, to go home safely at night and to be with their families, not being exposed to the issues of occupational violence. And if that comes at some patient cost, we need to work that through. So this didn't come without its challenges. It did challenge the very essence of what we do. So in other words, we're saying it's not about patient as the priority, it's about our people as a priority first. It's taken some time and consistency. We've still got work to do to take people on this journey with us. And we did have to change the cultural soul mindset. But the real fundamental element for us was we can't best serve our patients if we aren't protecting ourselves first, which does fully lock into the values of all the healthcare workers in our system. So what does this mean for Darrell now? Just run that for me.
It was very difficult, especially going home to my young family at the time. Mum went off to work okay, but came home with a black eye, concussion. Really hard to tell my young kids about that. And it's affected me in that I teach all of my graduates and all of my staff to their safeties first, absolutely first, no questions asked.
So her experience as well as the...
It was very difficult, especially going home to my young family at the time.
Push that to the next one, thank you. That her feedback to us is that it's really changed her trust in people. She's more aware now of where her exits are and she teaches her people around their safety. But importantly, what she does say is she feels supported when she makes a choice about safety by her managers, by the organisation. I can honestly say I'm not sure that would have been the case 2 years ago. What she does still say, despite all she's been through and everything else, is a job she loves and she couldn't imagine doing anything else. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about our story today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tony, very much for sharing that. Can I invite questions? Thank you. Just introduce yourself, thanks.
Yeah, Ian Gibson from Latrobe Regional Hospital. You mentioned the board reports. What's the content and presentation of your board reports?
So there is simple metrics that go up each month relating to actually just the numbers of reports of occupational violence and the number of actual injuries, and then quarterly there's a detailed breakdown of them by because we're a statewide service, by region, by type, by lost time, and importantly narrative about what we've seen thematically and what we're doing about it. The nature of providing data without narrative around what you're doing, because this is something we provide lots of data to boards, but the issue is then our board are very keen to go, it's fine, but what are we doing about it? And so the thematic analysis and then the changes we're making to address what that's showing is part of the reports. And there's a very deep dive quarterly as part of the People and Culture Committee into that.
Thanks, Tony. Other questions? Over here, thanks.
Thanks, Tony. It's Karen Lang here from Kyneton District Health. I was just wondering, and either you might answer it or perhaps Alistair, who spoke before you. You spoke about the chemical restraint policies that you have, and we've spoken earlier about the behaviour assessment rooms, and there's certainly staff have expressed their misgivings or they're not aware of the legal obligations or implications of restraint of patients under these circumstances, and there certainly some staff have expressed reticence to act, and to retreat to a safe place is fine, and that's what I would encourage. But what are the implications legally of the chemical restraint you're talking about, the policy, and also of those behaviour assessment rooms? Do they constitute restraint?
So Alistair will be pleased to know I'm not a lawyer and I won't be giving legal advice, so this is a disclaimer. I can't speak about behavioural assessment rooms. Others in the room potentially could do that. I can speak about our work, which we've looked at in detail. So from a common law point of view, we need to protect people from harm. These people are either harming themselves or harming others. And the drugs we're using are medically safe. And the reality is that us physically trying to restrain someone without sedating them actually puts them at risk. And so there are no issues at all with that. There are no legislative barriers to us doing it. The real issue, and from a common law point of view, we're creating a safe environment for the individual to allow them to get taken for medical assessment, and we're also protecting our staff at the same time. So there are no issues in that context. Alistair and others can talk more about the sort of more detailed elements of it, and around behavioural assessment, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk to that. There are others probably best placed.
Thanks, Tony. Alistair, would you like to say anything now? Or?
Only insofar as with all of these types of restraint policies, procedures, those sorts of things, the best advice is to get some advice on it and to actually understand what the risks are and whether it's going to create an issue for you. So simply restraining someone at common law can potentially be false imprisonment. It will depend upon the reasons you're doing it and the broader context. So each different way of doing these things needs to be considered in its fullness before a decision's made, and I have no doubt that's what AV's done, and it's what I'd urge anyone to do who was looking at something like that.
But Alistair, the principle which Tony's really clearly espoused is our staff are our primary responsibility, and so caring for patients cannot be at the expense of putting our staff at unreasonable risk. And is that a principle that you would endorse?
I'd absolutely endorse that as a principle, in the sense that, and it's that word unreasonable. Ultimately, I think you need to empower people to make a judgment for themselves based on the best information and the best procedures. Ultimately, we can't say you need to put yourself in that position of risk. We need to give people the tools that they can make a decision based on the information before them.
And know that they'll be backed by their CEO and their board.
I think really the key issue for us is that it's about systemising it as much as practicable. And so once you systemise, you can scenario base it and let people know that the reality is that when it's, one, situational awareness is absolutely critical around some of these things, but then it's looking at putting in a systemised approach which has standard policies, procedures, allows you to train to those. And to again, I can't re-emphasise enough the importance of people knowing that you've got their back. At the end of the day, we often, and these are difficult roles where we might be sitting there trying to balance lots of legal and other moral responsibilities. If you take the principle that, simple again, legislative, I'm accountable to provide a safe as practicable workplace, then the things that we've done and provide for that.
Thank you, Tony. And we might call that discussion to a halt at that point, but are you staying around for lunch? People may wish to explore more of that with you over lunchtime. Can you thank Tony very much for that fabulous presentation? And thanks again to Marnie, Jennifer, Will and Alistair for contributing their presentations to the discussion this morning. We'll break now. We will be coming back at 1:30, I think. So lunch is out in the foyer, and please take the opportunity to network, and if you could start coming back in at about 1:25, I'd appreciate it. Thanks again.